So I've been thinking a lot lately about how I've personally changed as a racket reviewer. Like, I've been reviewing tennis products for a pretty long time. My first video ever came out March 22nd, 2020. It was a shoe review that I did for my friend Steven on his channel called The Slice Tennis. Hey guys, this is a new segment for The Slice. I'm Beckett, bringing you Heat on the Feet. I had a recurring segment on his show, recurred like 3 times, but it was called Heat on the Feet. And it was called Heat on the Feet because when I first met Francis Tiafoe in Delray Beach, I was wearing my AirTech Challenge 2s, like the Agassi shoes. He shook my hand and said, "Oh man, got the heat on the feet." And that was possibly the coolest moment of my entire life. From then, about a month later, like April 22nd, 2020, I put out my first ever racket review for Courtside Sport. Hi, I'm Beckett from Courtside Sports, and today we're going to be talking about the new Head Speed G360 Plus MP. The way that I approached racket reviews back then, I was really looking to provide like an objective framework for people to help them find what racket would work for them. It didn't happen in my first video, but eventually for Courtside Sports, I developed a scoring framework. And of course, that's nothing new, like Tennis Warehouse does that in their written reviews. And I just felt like I was missing something. You know, control is so subjective, power can be so subjective. What do you actually mean by control? And so when I started TennCom January 2020, I debuted a new scoring system with the idea of being more objective and more scientific and more specific with the language that I was using to describe these tennis rackets. So that's why I said potential energy, which is like the douchiest sounding thing, but it was supposed to encompass like power and spin, because when you look at a racket from a technical perspective, anytime you're increasing the power potential of a racket, you're also increasing the spin potential of a racket. So when you have a higher swing weight, that means the amount of force you can apply to the ball is going to be higher if you can maintain your same swing speed. Same thing with beam thickness, right? Or RA. The stiffer the racket's layup is and the beam is, it more efficiently can redirect energy. That should be redirected both in terms of power, but also in terms of spin. So that's why I kind of nested those two. Same thing with string bed performance. Like I don't want to go through all these categories here. But I was really trying to look at the racket in isolation and understand how that racket performs in a vacuum. Try to take away the variable of the player from my racket's reviews to make them feel more objective, so that when you were going to buy your next tennis racket, you could feel confident after watching my review that I had really taken myself out of the review and was prioritizing how that tennis racket plays on court. So you could really compare all these different rackets. But as time has gone on, I feel like that's a really flawed approach. You're discounting the human element, and to take the human element out of tennis is to make it not tennis anymore. And that's something that I should have known. It should have been obvious to me. Like, I studied economics in university. I have a bachelor's in economics, if you care about that. And what we do in economics is we create models, right? And the problem with these economic models is they're missing so many variables, but that's why we make them. It's because we can't account for all the variables in the socioeconomic system of like a city or a town or an entire country. So that's why we have to cut things out. And by cutting things out, we become less and less accurate. So I felt that my reviews were starting to lose a little bit of personality. They were losing what makes tennis so special. And to me, what makes anything that humans participate in special is the human element. It's the subjective. And to get even more philosophical, I don't believe that true objectivity even exists, because every experience we have is through our own perception, and everything we think is based on a series buildup of our own experiences, our own perceptions, things our parents taught us, our own biology, whatever. So the idea that, I could play with whatever, like my Slinka Whiteout and think it's the greatest racket ever, The idea that that means that this racket would be the greatest racket ever for somebody else is not going to make any sense. So one way that I've thought about this in the past, and of course it's an oversimplification and cuts out a ton of important variables, is you could boil tennis down to the process of hitting the ball. It's a collision. As a player, you're trying to apply the correct amount of force to every shot. So force equals mass times acceleration. And now in my head, mass is the tennis racket and acceleration is the player. The player controls the amount of acceleration, and then the player selects a racket which provides the amount of mass-based force they're applying to the shot, right? So that's kind of how I was thinking about it. I was really trying to separate that mass, separate the racket from the whole tennis playing experience. But as I started reviewing rackets and trying to understand how I could help more people play tennis and find the right tennis racket for them, I really had to start putting myself in their shoes as a player. And a big part of this is through my racket and string consultations, right? So I'm trying to understand, when you email me your request for a consultation, what do you need as a player? And being able to make those recommendations successfully, which is something that I believe that I do based on the feedback that I've gotten from those people, is that I need to put myself in their shoes. I need to understand how all these different types of players are going to experience all these different types of rackets to help give them the recommendation that's going to be useful for them. You know, I say I love this whiteout because it works so well for my forehand. Well, I'm the only person in the world who has my forehand. Yeah, okay, maybe it looks like your hitting partner's forehand, kind of, or maybe you want to say it looks like Taylor Fritz's forehand, kind of. And so maybe Taylor Fritz and your hitting partner would also like the whiteout, but we can't guarantee that because their forehands are their forehands. And the idea that different rackets are going to work with different types of people is obviously not a new idea, but the catalyst that really got me thinking of this recently was when I listened to AC Tennis on Tennis Nerd's podcast. So the way that AC Tennis reviews rackets, according to that podcast, and I talked to him fairly often on Instagram as well, so I feel comfortable regurgitating this. So he will review a racket until he feels he's figured out how to use that racket optimally. And so when he picks a racket to use as his racket of choice, that racket is used optimally for his game as well. And that's a really interesting approach, and that's an approach that I had not really consciously considered until he said it. And I think I've subconsciously sort of done it in the past, but it's not something that I've actively tried to do until recently. So when I first started reviewing rackets and really demoing a lot of rackets when I worked at Courtside Sports, because I had so much access there, the way I would test rackets is I would pick it up, try it, and then go, I don't really like this, I'm probably not going to keep using it. And so that's more looking for what kind of racket works for you. And that's really good advice for you if you're trying a bunch of demos. Trust your gut, go with what instantly works for your game. Don't try to force things. Just because Alcaraz is having success with his Pure Aero 98 doesn't mean you're going to. And it's not because you're not as talented as Alcaraz, it's more because your game is not the same as Alcaraz. Most likely, especially according to my analytics, you are not like, what is he, a 20-year-old Spanish kid who's been coached by Juan Carlos Ferrero since he was a teenager. You are most likely a 30-year-old man in the United States who probably learned tennis during COVID or maybe played some junior tennis a little bit before that. Since I heard AC Tennis talk about that, I've really been consciously trying to review rackets using his method. So there's two rackets that I tested basically at the same time that really made me feel the difference between reviewing a racket for yourself and reviewing a racket for the optimal player. And those rackets are the Center Spec Graphene Touch Speed MP and the Regna, which I'm gonna just go hold. So Ironically, I started testing these rackets right after I made that other video just like this one where I complained about rackets not feeling unique, like they didn't have good personalities. The Regna and the Speed MP both have tons of personality. The Speed MP really likes, especially in center spec, it really likes the forehand of center. It wants you to like do this rock skipping motion where you have a really Western grip, a lot of lag, and you almost lead in with your elbow. It really likes that. I have a window right here, I don't want to hit it. It's like this kind of motion on the forehand. It loves that. You can just let it fly, play super loose. The Regna hates that. I haven't figured out exactly what about the various weight distributions causes this. I think it really has to do with balance though. That's my initial thought. The Regna, I get way more success with like really conservative semi-Western where my knuckle is almost on the corner of the main big bevel and the kind of diagonal bevel. And it likes more of a laid back, early contact, linear stroke, more like Alcaraz, more like Federer, more old school and more beautiful tennis, right? That I thought was super interesting. Here I have two completely different rackets who want me to change my forehand completely from racket to racket so I can play well with each of them. This also kind of came right on the back of the Blade 98 review, which for me was one of the hardest racket reviews I've ever made. I haven't loved the Blade for multiple generations now. This is no secret. I really didn't like. It was not fun for me to test that blade whatsoever. It didn't work for my game. I really had to change the way that I play tennis to have success with that blade. My forehand didn't work. I had to go to the forehand style of the Regna, but really hit flat over the net. I wasn't getting a lot of margin on my shots. I never felt in control of what this racket was doing on court, and it kind of ruined the tennis playing experience for me, and that's one of the reasons I think that review feels much less personal to me, and one of the reasons I also relied on other people being in that review to people who have had success with the blade more recently than I have, people who maybe the blade is designed for rather than someone like me who I don't think the blade is designed for me. So that review was really kind of a turning point for me in changing what kind of rackets I wanted to review. And this comes on the back of a personal goal and a content strategy that I set for myself at the beginning of 2024. Starting in January, I really wanted to make videos for me, videos that I really like, videos that I want to watch, and be less interested in constantly pumping content out, trying to do 2 videos a week, which is what I did in 2023, or focusing on getting maximum views. I really try to make videos that I want to make, and part of that is reviewing rackets that I'm interested in. I'm not going to review a racket now if I don't like using it or I don't feel like it tells an interesting story. And I think that became pretty obvious like in the Dunlop CX200 review. I really liked playing with that racket, and I know no one cares about Dunlop at all, but I think my passion for the racket showed in that video. It was really fun for me to make personally, and I think the audience caught on to that a little bit. I think that's why I'm the most biased racket reviewer on the internet now. I don't claim to be unbiased, but I'm trying to share with you my genuine experience with different rackets. I'm probably the most biased racket reviewer. And that doesn't mean I don't have your best interest at heart. I do want to be helpful with the reviews, but I want to be honest about telling you these are my experiences, and I do try to put myself in your shoes. Like I'll play a few different play styles against Simon to get an understanding of how a certain racket likes to be used. I want to know how it works on flat shots, how it works on spin, how does it play at net, how does it work at slower swing speeds versus fast swing speeds, because I think that's a really big differentiating factor between different types of players out there. And I do try to do all those things, but my camera has shut off So you're just gonna hear voiceover and some hidden footage for the rest of this video. I do try to do all those things to try to provide useful consumer advice, but at the end of the day, I am the most biased racket reviewer because you can't be objective in tennis. That doesn't mean I don't have your best interests at heart. I do really care about you, the viewers. I want to make sure you're having as much fun playing tennis as possible, and I know that happens when I'm truthful, when I'm honest about what rackets can and can't do for you on court, what strings can and cannot do for you on court. For me to produce the best video I can, the most honest, the most true to me video I can, to share with you what my experience is, I think leaning into the subjectivity of this whole thing is going to lead to the purest outcome, if you want to use that word, pure. And so that's, I guess, the message of this video, is that understand that all reviews are biased. Anyone who claims to not be biased, or anyone who claims to be objective, is missing, I think, a big part of what makes life special, about what makes tennis special. And it's not that you shouldn't listen to people who claim that they are unbiased, it's just know that maybe they haven't thought through what bias is all the way, because you cannot remove bias. And the best thing that you can do is share your bias, to admit your bias, to be transparent with your bias, and to accept that we just do the best that we can. We're all people, and that's that. And also, if you want to care about monetary bias, just for the last 2 seconds of this video, no tennis companies pay you for reviews. Not once have I been offered money by a tennis company to positively review anything. Not once has a company asked for a specific positive review in exchange for goods. That's never happened. They've provided review units for me, and then pretty much I don't hear from them. There's been 1 or 2 cases where they've wanted to preview the video prior to it being posted, and each of those times I said no. If I get paid, I tell you it's sponsored. It's a sponsored video. I don't know what else you can do. That's what you have to do by law. If I don't do that, it's against YouTube's terms of service, so I would get taken off the platform, but it's also against the law. Most of the time, brands are reluctant to even send the product out. That's how stingy they are. They're not going around paying anyone for reviews, and I highly doubt any YouTuber is taking money from a brand unless they're telling you that they're sponsored, because it's exciting to get a sponsor. As a YouTuber, you kind of want to brag about it every time you get a sponsor. Like, I can't tell you how happy I am when I secure a good sponsorship with a company that I think is like trustworthy and reasonable, and one that I like with good people behind it. So